Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale. Non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
la civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Sempre, qualunque sia l'argomento trattato.
Always, I have felt that the word that I write needs to be said, to be pronounced. It is as if, put like that in a book, it has not yet said all it has to say. Only theater frees it completely. Heaven forbid that the word is not also already involved in life and does not re-involve life itself. There are words that are fatally and fitly destined to reveal something more in being spoken than in being written. All great texts, even those already perfect in themselves, at some point reveal this native instance. That is why I can imagine a world without novels and without poetry, but not a world without theater. Because after all, what is theater? It is the need to utter a request for forgiveness through a confession, the confession of facts that have happened. Because confession is a fact. You cannot theorize about it. Either it happens or it does not happen. This is what theater is. True theater and today that you try to plunge into what I call the guts of theater, it comes closer and closer to unspeakability according to the canons of bourgeois theater. Therefore, it demands a dictability that is of a different nature from that of ordinary theater.
Metti qui rosso, va bene. Grazie, buongiorno a tutti.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So you have just listened to Andrea Soffiantini reading a passage of the interview to Testori by Luca Brinelli before he died. And Andrea actually has been inspired for a new performance, a new show.
Seggiolone.
Ce l'ha più bassa.
Voi che cambiate?
Signora?
There's a problem of chairs, apparently. Thank you. Though this is solidarity between actors. So it is taken from this book, and this is a passage that explains very well how fundamental it is, theater is for Testori. Everything is theater. As our friend Valter Malosti knows, who performed texts that were not meant for the theater, and as well as Franco Parenti, because we always have to mention him when we talk about Testori's theater. When Testori published In Exito, he went to him and told him, this is something we have to perform in a theater. So this was one of the great events in the history of theater. So everything is a theater. The Le Maddalene was a theater that was read yesterday by Valter Malosti in the theater Galli. So these were poems that were written for the paintings on the Maddalena in the history of art, but they acquire a completely different dimension. So they become a presence on the scene, these words by Testori. So if we wanted to talk about Testori's theater, that means that we talk about his human and cultural adventure. So I would like to thank Andrea Ruth Shammah, who wanted to be here. He always wants to anticipate things, so who wanted to be here in spite of some problems. She wanted to come here with us. She didn't want to be connected remotely online. Andrée, well, the title of the meeting is talks about an inexhaustible friendship. Well, André's friendship with Testori is inexhaustible. If I think about everything André did and how he supported all his theater, well, I'm really moved. André participated in the foundation. I'm just to introduce your work in a way, together with Testori, Parenti, Excel, Fercioni, Renato Palazzi, of the most beautiful theater in Milan. It was formerly Salone Pier Lombardo, now it is the so-called Teatro Parenti. For those who do not live in Milan, well, it is one of the most beautiful places in the city, and even the pool that was near the theater has been recovered. It's a beautiful swimming pool from the 30s, and it is now open to the public. And so it's a place that is alive today. Valter Malosti yesterday performed Le Maddalene at the theater, and he has worked a lot with Testori's work. 6 times he directed, he worked with some works by Testori, but Valter never met him, actually. Well, he's too young to have met him. And then we have Andrea Soffiantini, who, well, in a way was born together with Testori. And he is loyal to Testori. Andrea works with Andrée, and they will be performing at the Franco Parenti Theater. So since I was talking about inexhaustible friendship, I just wanted to say, for those who are not familiar with that the Theater Franco Parenti is the result of the work of a Catholic writer, a communist actor, and a young Jewish director who was 25 years of age. Yes, this is actually the strength of the theater itself. So what kept us together, what made us work together. So man was the value of life to give, well, some meaning to our journey on this earth. So what I wanted to say was that we said that everything becomes theater in Testori's words. I really created shows for the theater, for Franco Parenti, and I owe him, and I'm really grateful to him, because there are things that you cannot forget in your life. I was really young at the time. I was 20 or 21 years old. I had worked at the writing Ambleto, and when Franco Parenti went to Turin, because there was no money, we were a cooperative, we were a very, well, poor group only our folly made us strong enough to believe in our dream. So he had to go and work in Turin because he needed money. So he said, who's going to direct it? And Testori said, well, let André do it. So that's how our story began. So what I started to do was this kind of theater with Testori's theater. What I wanted to say, but there would be so many things I would like to talk about. But anyway, what is interesting maybe for you is that today at 3 o'clock at the meeting there is a very interesting event on the power of algorithm with Paolo Benanti, a great expert who works with the data of the Vatican, and Nello Chesantini. So I participated in this event, and they were saying that we could choose something different from what the algorithm wants us to choose. Someone said we should go back to the meaning of words. Instead of speaking about users, this is the word the machine needs, but we could call them people, persons, and that made me think about Testori, because in the last test he made for us, it talks about why words, or rather why speaking words out loud changes things, because today the anxiety, the terror we have of what is happening is due to the fact that we do not use words. So this lesson, well, I performed 4 times the show on the betrothed, and with Giovanni Crippa, and then 10 years later, that was really a revelation, so to say, because the maestro was at the center, the need to speak, the need to say the words. The theater is the spoken word, so that was extremely important. It was a great success. After 10 years, I found it interesting again to do it. So we had Dr. Tedeschi, and then we did that again before the COVID pandemic. I said, we cannot forget this lesson. So every time I did it again, we were talking to a different kind of audience, but it was extremely important to repeat all those things. So then there was a 100th anniversary of Testori. So here we are like among relatives, even though I'm Jewish, but this doesn't change anything. But I have a lot of people from Communion and Liberation.
Bene. No, quando ho pensato...
So when I thought that it was necessary to do it again for the 100th anniversary of Testori, so I did the Maria Brasca, the first text that was performed by Franca Valeri at the Theater Piccolo, and then we did many others the whole season. So it was our 50th anniversary, and it coincided with the 100th anniversary of Testori. So, well, I think it was the most incredible gesture, because when Testori was very ill, and I was called at the hospital, and I was one of the last people he met, and he said, don't be afraid. Now you are the master, because the theme of the betrothed is this master that says the need to understand the importance of a master, of a teacher, of someone who teaches. So if the pupil of the time, at the first edition,
Io qui rifaccio là, l'allievo di allora...
So that pupil has become a master. So I think this is the best way to pay respect, to say that we were continuing along the same path. That edition of the Betrothed Diet I brought to Naples. So Testori is from Lombardy, and I brought it to Naples. I said, well, I owe a lot to Eduardo. Well, you know how to make yourself loved. And then you will tell me. Anyway, I put a lot of passion into it. So the show is, lasts for 3.5 hours. And the people in Naples with the dialect from Milan was really astonished, struck. The idea to affirm the importance of the word, well, all of this, we actually took the opportunity to say that those who really needed to do the avant-garde should know the language well. After 40 years, the story's words were still extremely powerful. Well, so celebrating his 100th anniversary doesn't mean to celebrate something that is past, something that was great in the past. It is something that continues to be important, to be with us.
Poi sull'amicizia.
Sottolineiamo che i Promessi
So we have to say that the Piccolo Teatro will host the Betrothed in October. Why? The Salone Pier Lombardo was created as an alternative to the Piccolo Teatro. When the Salone Pier Lombardo was created, well, the name itself had a weight of its own that was, in a way, in opposition to a more traditional theater, because it was the beginning of the 70s. It was a season when Milan was full of uncertainties. So we go beyond the Spanish Wall. So it was the suburbs at the time. And so we had this theater that was in constant movement. Well, it is not always easy to find an answer to this kind of questions. The idea to teach the pupil to become a master, to teach young actors along this limit between what is spoken, with the need to say what you have to say, because that's the focus of everything, in order to be on the scene, on the stage, and if you want to perform for the others, you want to communicate words. So these young people live a very strong experience with this master, with the masterpieces that are talked of by Testori, with Manzoni's Betrothed. So, well, the Promessi Sposi alla Prova is the real title. But anyway, this is all another story. Well, why the Piccolo Theater? Well, because it was, first of all, it was right to have Testori celebrated at the most important theater of the city, and with a piece that is the sum of so many ideas by Testori of what I myself did. I don't want to use concepts or words that Testori would not like. I don't want to say that we are, in a way, convalidated if we go to the Piccolo Theater. Public theaters are financially supported by the institutions. We, as a private theater, risk to have not enough money to pay our actors. So there is this risk element. And Testori liked this because poverty was seen as a choice, as a value. So, well, I think it is right to say that a theater that is important for the city felt the need to choose this show. So that's why we went. Thank you. That is exactly the answer I was awaiting.
Voglio affrontare un...
So, Andrea, as I said, worked as a director for the first time when he was 25 years, and you also started working with Testori more or less when you were the same age. And Emanuele Banter back then started working with Testori when he was 22. So believing in young people was a fundamental aspect for Giovanni Testori. There's one aspect which is symbolically very striking, especially in this year, which is the 100th anniversary of Testori's birth. Antonio Latella, another Italian author, wanted to launch a project. He will play the 3 Ambleto by Testori, the one that was supposed to be a movie, the Ambleto, that Andrea knows very well, and then post-Hamlet, that Andrea also presented here at the meeting. So 3 texts, 3 scripts in which Testori actually reflects on this figure, on this character, which was so fundamental for his life. Antonio Latella actually chose an unconventional form that was very much in line with the spirit of the story and launched a bid. Actually, he was looking for 8 young actors willing to be part in this project. Pesaro 2024 and Amat, the Theatre of the Marche region, supported the production. 610 young people, younger than 35 years of age, declared their interest to participate. They had only recently come out from a theatre school. And with Gilberto Santini, the director of Amat, Teatro delle Marche, they chose 50 out of the 610. And the 50 people were called for a week to actually do a test in Pesaro, in the city of Pesaro, and they had to, in a way, present a monologue written by Testori, chosen by them, and then also bring something of their own repertoire. Have you ever happened? Actually, I've happened, sorry, to actually listen to these tests, and I was struck by that, and I understood why so many people, 610 young people, willing to participate and present a text by Testori was nothing to be taken for granted. What I understood was that these young actors had basically left theatre school, and then the pandemic came, so they had basically done nothing, and the words by Testori could, in a way, heal their wounds. They, through the words of Testori, they were able of actually healing their wounds, and that was something that you could really perceive physically. 8 of them were eventually chosen. The project will start next autumn, and they will have their debut in the Piccolo Teatro, and after that in Pesaro after some time. And actually, these 8 young actors will work for 1 year with the words of the story. Corriere della Sera announced the project some time ago and wrote I giovani parlaci ancora Testori, meaning young people, Giovanni Testori, speak to us again. So, Andrea, what does it mean to start at such a young age with such significant and challenging words? Actually, you, for example, staged Factum Est. Before that, you had the Interrogatorio a Maria, so another significant piece. What does it mean to work with such important works? I believe that these extreme ease that the story had to approach young people was probably linked to the fact that young people find it easier to, in a way, confess their needs. And in doing so, they can come closer to the definition of theater by Testori. So real theater, authentic theater, is a theater that has the need of pronouncing a request for forgiveness through the confession of facts that have happened. Young people, if young people have experienced a fact that has happened, they are more willing to confess this fact. And therefore, it is more natural for them to request for forgiveness. And that request for forgiveness is at the same time a request for help. I remember, for example, in Factum, a particular episode together with Testori, while we were in the center of Milan, near the Rinascente, actually, he told me that he wanted to tell life through this job. I told him precisely that. And after a week, Testori brought me the Factum, which was a theater piece. And at the same time, the protagonist of Factum was a being about to be born in the mother's womb. And the idea was that there was this willingness to tell, to narrate life, and that being started communicating. So there was a masterpiece. But actually, I did make this confession to Testori. I told him that I wanted to tell life. But I told him that actually when I tried, nothing would come out of my mouth. And this need was immediately grasped by Testori and then turned into a theater piece. The same happened with Interrogatorio a Maria. He actually was looking for the company of young people who had who were not so academic in a way. And so he happened to meet this Teatro dell'Arca, and I was a member of Teatro dell'Arca. So he came to Forlì. The Teatro dell'Arca was based in Forlì, in the Emilia-Romagna region. And as a test to entrust us with Interrogatorio a Maria, he asked us to come on stage to pronounce the Ave Maria. All these things are true. I mean, they might appear absurd, but actually, we were asked to do this and to say this prayer. And this is precisely what he told us. You have to act this piece as if it were a prayer. Once again, that was the reply to a request posed by us, young actors. We were part of a young community of students that would then become Communion and Liberation. But there was a need expressed by young people. So young people actually talking to Mary on the mysteries of life. So the word becomes flesh immediately. Well, actually, I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with Giovanni Testori. I've already said that actually I worked with Franco Parenti, who's a comic actor, and in the work I did with him, and we were able to make people laugh. The texts that we produced are also ironic. For example, in The Betrothed, when Franco Parenti would play the role of Don Abbondio, I mean, he did his best to make people laugh because the idea was that of a popular kind of theater. The very same man who was blasphemous, who was an anomalous Catholic. At least when I met him, he was very much in search. He was in search of scandals. And actually, this is the kind of text of the story that we experienced. Then there was another Giovanni Testori, full of anguish, full of unrest, who eventually could find sweetness in his soul following the death of his mother. And after that, we have the Giovanni Testori of this kind of crazy language, which is a language that can, in a way, show the theater aspect of the story, or the same can be said of Malosti. Malosti takes a language and invention and then makes wonderful performances which are completely different. This happened not only in the world of theater, but this is very much in the nature of the story. I don't think that, for example, the Ambleto, the Macbeth, and the other works by Testori or the Arialda, we had the first Testori done staged by Visconti. There are other forms of Testori who are neo-realistic, and then all the various, natures of the story. The story is a journalist, is an art critic. So in order to understand why we are here talking about the story, I think, we all have experienced also personal moments with the story. For example, we were good friends and we worked together. But we're talking about a man who is still, in a way, some kind of a planet that is still unexplored. And sometimes people think that he's difficult to communicate, or maybe challenging, extremely challenging. I think that Giovanni Testori is still an explosion of, in a way, many different emotions, passion, words, etc., that it is a fact in the middle of the mediocrity of everything that surrounds us. So in the middle of this dullness, in a way, we have this kind of fireworks. So talking about the story today means talking about the generosity of donating ourselves, of making mistakes, of trying. So, for example, he's talking about Testori, but our Testori with Franco Parenti would make people laugh. So even if there were very, very difficult, terrible things during the Oedipus, he would talk, he would sing funny songs. And this is the story. This was the story. He was all of these things all together and authentic all the time, because he always had an absolute need of doing what he was doing, also of contradicting himself. Here we have a lot of different facets, as well as many others. The others were here. So if you're here and there's so many of you and you've heard about the story, I think you did really well in following this session. What was the kind of hint that led you to deal with the story? Andrea was talking about the language of the story. I always make an example and the analogy with Dante for very young children. For example, I have a 14-year-old daughter. If you look at Dante only on paper, he seems to be very, very difficult. But when you read him aloud, something starts manifesting itself. And the same applies to the story. The story is apparently difficult to be staged, but then when you act the story and speak his words with your voice, something happens. Well, then, of course, you have to use your brain a lot. And sometimes people, many actors have lost the habit. They're no longer accustomed to use their brain. The story forces you to do a certain kind of work, both physical and mental. The other example I normally add is this comparison between Shakespeare and the story. Both poets are very tangible. They're very concrete. All the things that the story says is not abstract at all. It is poetry, because it also expresses the organic nature of things. But everything is very, very tangible. It's very concrete. I mean, if you study Testori in his words, in his texts, you find a sense and a meaning everywhere. Everything has a sense. And if there's something that is tangible, that is concrete, of course, you have a real bomb, like Shakespeare's works of art. I directed the School of Teatro Stabile di Torino in Turin for three-year terms. Many important artists, for example, came out from that school. And Testori was one of the fundamental writers, playwrights, with whom we worked. For example, we did Spasoli in the beginning and Testori in the end. We worked on the Segreti di Milano. It was really a very constructive training experience. We also went through his art writings, the ones that André was mentioning before. I started working on that literary production by Testori. André and other artists had already done very, very well. I mean, that they've already dealt with a lot of things done by Testori. Actually, in my life, I would have liked to be a painter, but then I stopped because I was not a very good painter. So, Testori's art critique is very close to me. But it's worth reminding us all that the art critique by Testori is very much similar to that of Roberto Longhi, who was a master of Pasolini, and there was a form of art critique which is very emotional. The body and the soul are at stake. That's something that go beyond words. If you happen to listen to the Maddalene, you might think that actually it was produced in a very close relationship with Maddalene. And that is sad also in art critique. My first experience with Testori was an essay of art critique that he wrote with Olivetti in 1958. He commented on the frescoes in Ivrea. In the Olivetti plant, there is a Franciscan church, and it is close to the buildings of Gabetti and Isola. And this Franciscan church has a fresco by Spanzotti, and Testori thinks that, and said that that was one of the masterpieces of the end of the 15th century. And that was a text which was very dear to me. I mean, we were dealing with a painter, young painter, talking to his father, and then this young painter became Martino Spanzotti, a maestro, who in turn would be the master of Ferrari. So there was something which was very, very, very close to me. Testori has always walked along this way. I mean, he's always, in a way, passed the baton from one person to the other, from one master to the other. And then these masters become one different from the other. Another thing that is clear to me is that Testori was not looking for copies of himself. It was also difficult to find copies. I mean, he was looking for the uniqueness and the originality. Actually, when I started working as a director, he would tell me that my actors would play differently from the others, because all actors have to bring their original character. They have to bring their life, the life that is there through the words he says. And this is something that is possible in Testori. So, and this is in all texts. The Arialda, which apparently was an old-fashioned work of art, became very strong at school because it contained this energy. The story expresses this incredible energy. besides on Rialda and Maria Brasca, we also worked on the texts of I Segreti di Milano, which is a wonderful work of art. It is a masterpiece of Italian literature. And then, besides all these things, one of the first things that I did at school was to have my students read Grunewald. If they managed to kind of overcome that challenge, the challenge posed by that text, the story in the text that talked about Grunewald and his the protagonists, the Christ, etc., in a very organic way. There is no compassion. There is compassion that goes beyond the compassion that we are accustomed to. So he kind of touches us with the body and the mind. I was just saying one thing, which is sometimes taken for granted. When we say that the story was important as a master, actually is something that is not common today, because today there are very few people, if known, who recognize the importance of the master. The things that the story said were always against the common way of thinking. Giovanni Testori, I mean, never went along with the tide. I mean, in art critique, he had fantastic intuitions. He decided, for example, that there was a great artist, much well ahead, well before than others recognized the same. These are provocations. In theater, he staged lots of provocations, and the very fact that there's so many of you before is not a minor thing. When I mentioned this before, well, I think this is a fantastic achievement, because Giovanni Testori has always been an uncomfortable person, an uncomfortable Catholic. So when you mentioned Franco Parenti was an uncomfortable communist. The establishment of the Communist Party didn't want him. I've always been an uncomfortable feminist woman. So we've always been uncomfortable people. Our thought never has to be influenced by conformism and by fashions. The intellectual risk of what you think, this is actually what this story expresses. So the very fact that we recognize him today is, and that we do this without simplifying him and trivializing him or reducing him to an easy portrayal. So continuing talking about his complexity is a fantastic thing. The story was a difficult author. But when we talk about masters, actually, it seems to me, do you think that young people today believe in the importance of masters? I mean, when we pronounce these things, when we talk about our masters, and when we say thank you because we learned this from our masters, this is something which is not common today. Young people do not thank their own parents. Everything is some kind of a given. The whole work of the story is like that. So that's why many people talked about the age of neorealism. The language used by Testori was not simplified and was not easy at all, even in his times. Then you constantly have this will to, in a way, want what you want, irrespective of what the others think. And this may apply to many different things. I mean, for example, being an older woman wanting to have a younger partner or wanting to have children. I mean, the idea is that of accepting to bear the cross, in a way, accepting the difficulty of being in this world and the effort and the pain that also the story would feel because of the things I mean, in other words, he was not looking for everybody's approval. he could bear the cross of being what he was. And this is particularly strong. I mean, he could have found a consensus he wanted. I mean, he had all the tools to do so because he was very seductive. But when he was too seductive, he would, in a way, detach from the people. And that's why I can talk about him, because ever since I met him as a young woman, and it was in 1969, up until when he died in 93, even when we were not working on his texts and staging them in theater, I've always spent some time with him, and he's always been a master to me. And I'm saying this because it's quite exceptional that we're talking about him today. He was also very much attracted with the abyss. The more difficult things were, the more he went into certain things.
One thing we need to mention is that Testori loved to work and loved to have people working. So he made Franco Parenti work, he made you work in a way, in facing his language. So he was someone who was not afraid to risk. He was a very concrete person, so he actually shaped the right language. And another aspect that emerged from what Andrea Soffiantini said is love for the actor, the body of the actor. Well, it's love for people in general, but anyway, since we're talking about theater, it is the body of the actor, the voice of Franco Parenti, for instance. So this is a form of love, and that can be perceived, I think, and then Valter will tell us if it is actually so. Because, well, one has to be a little crazy to stage the story, but it actually brings you some kind of happiness. So I have to confess something. Factum est had some eatings. Please tell us about that anecdote. But I was saying something else. When he wrote Factum est, it is a fetus that speaks and asks for his right to exist. So politically, it was a topical theme. Franco Parenti, who really admired Testori, he said, I understand that these are themes that I cannot talk about because our theater at the time was seen as a theater of the left, but I would really love to perform in that language. So I don't know if I can go on saying those words. Maybe in the end they can convince me. So yeah, he really wanted to perform a Factum est. I wanted to say this, and then by saying it, I'm convinced by it. So this is the power of this language. And he really wanted to, but well, he did something really exceptional. But I think we have a time limit. How many minutes do we have left? 14. So what is this experience? Because Valter is a director, but he's also an actor. Well, it is like trying to find your balance, and you're always afraid to fall because you never know when these sentences will end. And this is the meaning also in his poems. It is a great emotion. I have also staged Testori, the Lady of Macbeth, but I was drunk. So if we wanted to conclude with something that is funny, but anyway, when you have, well, you talk about Testori writing in Italian, this is one thing, but when he invents his own language, well, there you have to, well, I love Shakespeare very much, so this is not very different from Shakespeare. You need to look for something concrete. You need to understand what he wants to tell you. You don't have to look for anything philosophical. It is a theater for everyone. It is, in a way, popular theater, that even in the most extreme tests, it communicates. So for an actor, it is a great joy to be able to stage this. The example I was giving you before about my students, the training of these young people is never enough, because Testori would like us to work in a different way when training young actors. We needed to keep in mind everything that surrounds us, specifically the part of the cultural heritage, which is often neglected. We had a tour with Giovanni Agosti, who is an art critic, and I brought these young people in museums and I asked them to read the paintings, but they can't. They are illiterate, so to speak. It is as if I looked at a stone. I'm not an expert in archaeology, so I don't recognize what I'm looking at. You can like a painting because of its colors, because of the trade, but, well, Testori makes us study everything that is around this work. So do you discover new worlds? So there is this physical pleasure to perform, but to be also rediscover a heritage which is very Italian. We went to Varallo, to the sacred mountain, to stage the Ambleto. With the colors, and the wall, the background of our theater was the same wall that you find in Sacromonte. So it is actually a very political theater, because it teaches you to look at reality, to look at your own heritage as an Italian. So it talked about expressive roots. I think it is a very beautiful concept, and I think we should help our young people, young students, to find these expressive roots. Well, when he came to Forlì, he used to ask for going to the art museum. He wanted to meet the director, looked at Cagnacci's paintings in the big hall of this museum in Forlì, and it would stand like this. But he obviously already knew these paintings, but he still looked at them as if it was the first time, like that.
E voi?
E lui dietro, dopo un po', sai, vedere uno che guarda, cioè dice,
And after a while, well, you were standing there too, and then he said, well, if he's so interested in these paintings he knows so well for such a long time, then you start to wonder and ask yourself, maybe there is something I'm missing. What is it in those paintings that I can't find? And looking at him, looking at the paintings, you start to understand that there are some details that you have never really seen. So yes, it's not just like looking at it, it's actually seeing something. I'm really sorry that Testori never came to the Spanzotti, because there was this popular choir, and there was a first practice, a first test. I thought we were going to have 8 people. At the end, there were 40 people. When they came through this church, because it's a Franciscan church, a part that is that for the faithful, and the other part is that for the friars. So when we had the members of this choir walk by these frescoes, well, they had the same expressions, the same faces. So this is the reality, the concreteness. Testori talks about the hair and the physical characteristics of the figures that he describes. 3 more small details. So, in Ambleto, we read about the queen when we went to the Theater Eliseo, invited by Romolo Valli, we took the rabbits, the chicks, there was everything actually in the Eliseo theater that was really high level. Then we staged the Ambleto, and then Balfercioni is very provocative, so we really, had really also a very bad smell, the smell of animals and of farms. So we did a lot of things that were actually very provocative. But then Macbetto, and then Oedipus, that talks about a historical compromise. And then they found Moro's body at the time, so it was really topical. And there was the former Italian President Pertini there. And when Franco Parenti, the actor, says spectaculanti, and then he goes out of the stage as if he doesn't want to perform anymore. And he says, I ask for your forgiveness. And the whole audience were saying, we do not forgive you. They were cheering the tickets in pieces. So then it was really a scandal. They wouldn't let us go on. Pertini had to intervene to defend Franco. So because we wanted to use a Testori to change the kind of audience that used to go to Eliseo. We wanted people who were younger. So this is the reason why we were invited there.
Degli episodi, ripeto, questi faccio quelli.
Another anecdote.
Non il finale della giornata, ma per me è un'immagine.
And well, there is an image that I cannot forget. And I want to share this moment with you. So the funny part is that I have staged two. I was in Brescia. Emanuele Severino was there.
Gigantesca attrice che ha.
Luisa Rossi was a great actress. She was the queen in Ambleto and in Macbetto. But she was drunk, so she couldn't really perform. I was in Brescia that day. Luisa Rossi didn't have a very good memory, so I had actually studied with her the lines, and so I knew the part. So I said, well, the audience is there, so, well, I'm going on stage. Please read as a director. Yes, you don't have to worry, I'm not going to perform as an actress. So I go on stage, but the lady has to start by reading a letter, and as a director, a stupid director, I decided that she would enter and read the letter, and she didn't have her glasses. So I go and look for some light and read like this. Well, the audience must have been thinking, if she has to read the whole text like this, well, we will never finish. So at the end of the letter, because the idea, well, was there, I throw the book away and I start actually performing. And I say,
Applauso perché non.
And I stopped reading, and all the audience started to applaud.
Poi ho ripreso il libro e ho letto tutto.
And then I read the text until the end. So the anecdote that I really have to share with you is the following. During Maria Brasca, Testori came to the show because he hadn't seen it. He was ill. He was in the hospital. He wanted to see this show, this piece. And there are some magical coincidences. That Sunday afternoon, we didn't know when Testori would come. So that Sunday afternoon, there was a group of people from Novate Milanese, where Testori was born and where his family lived. A group of people, a lot of women actually. At the end, well, Testori was very thin at that time, he came on stage and he wanted to dedicate to Franco Parenti a hymn that is present in the betrothed when Father Cristoforo talks about Milan and says Milan is a city and so on. So he takes out his book. He thinks about Franco Parenti, who was dead at the time, and he dedicates this passage to Franco Parenti without realizing that while he was reading, everybody knew he was very ill. It was quite easy to see. And when he said, city, cradle, city, coffin, where we all rest, one day our tired head, then at that moment something incredible happened, and something that makes theater something incredible. There was a complete silence. He couldn't even go on because we were all with him. What is a community? What is theater? What happened? Something happened. So at the end, there was a complete silence. People didn't even applaud. So that silence, as I always say, then at the end there was a roaring applause. Sometimes, well, the applause is something that disturbs. So, well, I always recount this anecdote because it makes people understand what being together means. He didn't think he was reading something that that was very close to his destiny, and then he went back to the hospital and never came out. So I think this is the most important message, to take seriously the work we do. Let's take it seriously. Thank you, André.
Grazie a tutti per questo incontro.
I would like to thank you all for this event, for this meeting. As president of the Testori Foundation, I would like to thank the Rimini meeting, who decided to pay homage in such a truthful way this 100th anniversary of Testori with Valter's show and the 3 events. So if meeting can do this thing, the meeting needs to be supported. So I also say you have need to come and see also our show. Donate to the meeting. Thank you, everybody, and good evening.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto. un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.